This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
They have this misperception that there's some eye in the sky who is going to judge them for not spending time at work. And most people that I know will tell you that they could care less if you go to your kid's soccer game at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. The person who is stopping you from doing that is generally you.
Intentional, thoughtful, the ability to get people and profit. I mean, I've had a lot of guests on, and I'll be the first to acknowledge when you kind of judge a book by its cover. Like, you do a quick glance at somebody, like, guys got introduced to me from HR, but like, and this is not to vilify or knock HR in any way, shape, or form, but like, Steve, you've been in some pretty cool spots. I mean, Ford Motor Company, Sun Microsystems, Bridgewater. You're currently running the program manager running the CHR Leadership Academy at Michigan State. And somehow you figured a way to do this all 30 miles outside of Boulder in the mountains, because I think you're a skier, right? Not snowboarder.
Yeah, just about every other day I'm on some form of skis.
Well, thanks for fitting us in. Is this the other? Are we the other day?
At 60, I can only ski for about 4 hours. So
I'm slightly jealous, but I go back to the words that we started with: this intentionality, this thoughtfulness. You've been able to live in an EQ world, but also understand the importance of profitability and importance of business. From our initial conversation, and folks, you should know, yes, we try to be prepared when we bring guests on. Like, for me, it felt like you kind of understood both universes of people and profit. The fact that how do you get the most out of people, and you study your stuff, Steve. It's like, even now, like, you're in coaching, you're in talent management, you're in M&A, you're in future work, you're in organizational design and change. How did this happen? Like, were you just curiously interested in it all? You just followed your career? I'd love to hear, how it happened.
yeah, Ryan, I wish and thank you for those kind comments. I wish I could tell you that this was a master plan, but that would be lying. I distinctly remember being in my junior year in undergrad, and my father happened to be on the faculty at the school I went to, Michigan State. And I went to see him one day for lunch, and I said, how you doing? We talked, and he asked me how I was doing. And he said, so you're about to graduate. What are you going to do? I went, that's a really good question. I don't have a clue. I was a triple major in poli-sci, psych, and employee relations. And I said, every job I interview for in these areas, it hardly pays a living wage. It's not like what you hear from a lot of millennials these days. I'm really I'm afraid I'm going to be stuck in dead-end gigs, et cetera. And he said, there's this program across campus called Labor and Industrial Relations. You should check it out. So I did. 50 years or 40 years later, I'm sitting here at the back end of that career, and I can tell you that there was no single greater catalyst for my career than getting that master's degree from MSU in Human Resources and Labor Relations, as we now call it. And that led me to first Ford Motor Company. And then I just started to follow. I've always been somebody who gets bored easily. And so when I saw that high tech was really emerging as a field, and I had an interest in computers from the very early days. I remember the day the World Wide Web was created. And the World Wide Web, the internet are not the same thing. And so I just started following my interests. So whether it took me to high tech, my first chief HR officer job was at Vail Resorts, skiing. I ended up doing Bridgewater Associates because I was fascinated by the culture and the radical truth and transparency mentality. So for the most part, I followed my interest. And what I now know much more clearly, and I do in my coaching practice, is I always encourage people to follow their passions and their interests, because you'll always be better.
I'm so glad this is where we're starting. And I think a lot of people follow Scott Galloway, and like remember seeing this clip that he had pretty much being like, excuse my French, like F your passions. Do not follow your passions. Go make your money, and then you can go follow your. Do you think anyone made their money following their passions? And like he went on this massive rant, and like look, I'm a Galloway fan, but like I am not in that camp. As you were talking, lots of head nods, because I've always tried to just stay curious, and I know I gain energy from the things that light me up. Like, why wouldn't I want to do more of those and then figure out a way to be compensated to do those things? Let's go back to the three major version of you, because when I hear that, though, there's only two places to go, right? Like one is, oh, dude, you're one of those three majors. Like that's off the charts smart. Or is it oh, he had no clue of what he wanted to do, right? It's like, I can also see that much when you have that much on your plate. Was it like, does it cause paralysis? Does it cause ambiguity? Or are you just like so enjoying the curious ride of like learning a little bit about this and the dash of that and the splash of that?
Yeah, I think definitely, at least in my case, it's the latter, not the former. I've always been curious. And I always also read the manual. And one of the things at the school I was at that was available is I had, with any major, a large number of electives. And with just doing a little bit of extra work, you could major in multiple things. And I thought, why not? Since I don't really know what I want to do, why not have credentials in a variety of areas? So it's probably, it was in practicality less impressive than it may sound. But it kind of signaled the rest of my life. I have always followed what I'm interested in. And the more mature and self-aware I became, to your prior point, the more I realized that, amongst many things, but about myself, if I didn't like and care about something, I had a hard time mustering enthusiasm, and therefore I was not as good at it. And, we've all been in jobs we didn't like. We've all been in situations that we had to bear. You can do that for a period of time. But if you're going to do that for years as your profession, I think that's asking a lot of most people.
The other unique sort of takeaway from the early days was, oh shoot, your dad was like on like kind of running the show where you were, right? Like going back, do you look at that like, well, he kind of left me alone, but when I needed to see him, it was cool. And Michigan State isn't 4,000 people. This is not a small school, right? So like, but did you feel, I mean, that's not normal for most people to like, oh, I actually was like, I tried to find a location that was close enough to home that if I needed to get there, I could, but far enough away that someone wasn't just showing up at my doorstep, but here you were at a school where it seemed like the family business.
Yeah, I was born in Denver. We moved to East Lansing when I was about 2, and I grew up in a college town. My dad, Dr. Hiram Fitzgerald, was on the faculty for 50 plus years. My mom taught in the public schools. So, both me and my siblings had our mom as teacher on occasion. But it was a different era. And parents then, I think my mom and dad were very much of this ilk. They weren't nearly as deeply immersed in our day-to-day business. My brother-in-law used to describe us as free-range children. I would ride my bike across town to do whatever I wanted to and be home by the time the streetlights came on. And I ended up going to MSU despite, considering other places, in large part because I could not conceive of a better college experience, having grown up there and knowing what it's all about. I was probably less than 10 miles from my childhood home, but my first semester, I barely went home. And so my parents were really cool about letting us spread our wings. But on the other hand, when I did want to go home, I could go home and do my laundry, which is pretty cool. So both of my folks, we're very close to this day, and I could not be more grateful for the childhood they gave us.
Let's kind of jump to the end, and then we can fill in the pieces along the way. Because it's cool that you've got this 3-decade, career now, and we'll just call it leadership. Let's just chalk it up to leadership. I mean, you've seen a lot of things, like you said, you've learned a lot along the way, but not that, not that legacy is something you were working on, but now that you look back at the choices that you have made, I mean, and you are in a coaching function now, like when you work with others and you explain your story, not just the origin story, but the arc of the story through, what do you hope the legacy takeaway is for people?
That's a big question. I don't know if I can give you the complete answer, but it would contain elements of, the Oracle at Delphi had the words "Know thyself" above, on the wall. And the sooner one can arrive in your life journey to a point where you know what you're good at, you know what you're bad at, you know where you have flaws and where you have blind spots, you are willing to accept them, and that you have developed the self-confidence to admit to yourself that you're not perfect, nor will you ever be, and that's okay. And then guardrail yourself against your imperfections. That makes you an incredibly better leader, because you build teams around you that are better because of the whole than you ever could be individually. And I think you become much more patient, forgiving, and understanding of the people you lead, in part because you've arrived at a better place, but also because you realize it took you time to learn that. And so it made me a much more patient leader and more willing to invest in time with my people, let them struggle, let them fail, knowing that learning is not linear. So that would be one portion of it. Let me pause there and see if that strikes any chords.
Yeah, I mean, the first thought is, well, that takes a serious amount of awareness, right? To sort of step outside of yourself and look at yourself and go, wow, that's what I'm really good at. And that's where, maybe I need to like surround myself with some folks that can see things for me where I have blinders. But, the bigger question I had was, if you skip the Steve Fitzgerald rock across the pond, and you've been to a lot of places like Vail and Ford and whatnot, when do you feel you got there? And of course it's a mosaic, right? It's a collection of experiences along the way. But like, if there were percentages, or were you like, oh, if I had a time machine and I could just run this job back because I didn't love myself at X, is there a place, or do you feel like?
Yeah. So my first chief HR officer, first C-suite job was at a company called Vail Resorts. And it was around 2006, which is almost 20 years ago. So it would have been in my 40s. If I had that job 10 years later, I would have been 2x better at it. And it wasn't because of technical skill. There was a little bit of that. There are things when you're in a C-suite, and particularly in HR, that have to do with governance that are fairly refined technical skills, equity, board, SEC stuff. But the vast majority of it was because of the maturation of me as a person and as an adult. And that realization that I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to know everything. What I had to do was deliver the results that were required. And it didn't matter if it was me doing that or my team. I just had to get it done. And that personal growth took place someplace in my 40s to my 50s.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is, it takes you 40 years to figure out who you are and the next 40 to be that person. And it's like, oh man, like dart on, like bullseye shot. All right, so keep taking me on this journey from a legacy standpoint.
Yeah, and so the second thing that kind of comes to mind is the importance of practice. We've all been taught things. We go to, whether it's you're in a corporation or your organization or school, and you learn something for the first time. And I think one of the great misfortunes of the last 25, 30 years, in particular in corporate America, as we go through each of these economic shocks and we contract as businesses to save money, to stay alive, when they end and we come back, we have diminished the importance and the investment in helping people not just learn a new thing, but then become adept at it. And in order to become adept at it, you have to get repetition. Malcolm Gladwell wrote his book about the 10,000 hours and that sort of thing. And I don't pretend to know if it's 10,000 or 1,000 or whatever. But what I do know, and perhaps this was best manifested for me when my sons were young and I coached them in hockey, and I was not good at it in the beginning, but I became pretty good at it when I realized that in order to teach a young hockey player to skate down the ice, pick up the puck, stick handle around somebody and shoot, I had to break each of those things up into their separate elements, teach them each element, let them fail and practice, and then only when they had mastered those component parts to put them together, and again, let them go through the practice that it took. And the more I thought about that in my professional life, the more I realized it was no different with a 33-year-old MBA grad from Wharton. When she hadn't done X before, she was not going to be terrific at it on day one. And it was okay, but to give them more reps. So that's the second sort of key foundational plank that I would have today.
Yeah, this feels like a classic case of just normal fear, right? Like you're not great because what a surprise, you're not great at it the first time you do it, and then you talk yourself into you're not good at something. It's like, no, you just haven't had the at bats yet, and fear is very good at what it does. When you think about your coaching practice now, and you could come at this from like the Michigan State side or like, because you teach, you've got clients yourself, right? You're going 1v1.
Yeah, I have my own coaching practice,
right?
And I sit on several boards and venture capital stuff.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get to that because it's like messy in all the right ways, in a good way, but kind of, it goes against what some of the things I learned in marketing. But I actually, it makes sense to me knowing you. When you think about like the ideal, if you're like, hey, this is the perfect person to introduce me to. Like if you run into this person from a coaching standpoint, what are you looking for in like the ideal person?
To be coached?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the very clear answer to that, Ryan, is somebody who, as I said earlier, has the self-confidence to welcome the effort and the feedback to know themselves better. And I would say 80% of the coaching that I do in my personal practice, not the MSU Academy, because that's a little different. But most of the time when I get hired by companies, it's generally with people in the C-suite or on the cusp of it who have gotten to that point in their life. And as Malcolm Gladwell famously wrote, what got them there and what got them here won't get them there. And so most of the time, I run into people who have behavior that is so ossified that it's very hard for them to change it. And in most cases, they are either blind or knowingly ignoring the fact that it's getting in the way of their success. So when I do that, I have to work for months to break down that veneer and get them to confront the reality of how they're perceived. And that can be emotionally hard for folks. So what makes my life easier is somebody who comes to that and says, and I actually love this. I've had a major failure and I've reflected upon that. And upon reflection, I need to change and I need somebody to help me with that. That makes my job 1,000% easier.
Those moments though,
they're rare.
Well, not only I want to give the audience some credit here. Like if you're listening to this show, you probably are coachable, right?
Yeah.
You probably are open-minded enough. Maybe you don't like the price tag or want to know the price tag, but like you're confident enough that you could take feedback. Or it's funny you said Malcolm Gladwell. It's actually Marshall Goldsmith who said what got you here.
Yeah,
right?
You're right.
But it's the MGs. Like maybe I should just change my name to another MG. I mean,
again, I'm 60s. Things start to run together.
Malcolm Gladwell, Marshall Goldsmith, two guys that are just I've always credited. But Marshall also talks about it's not feedback, it's feed forward, right? Yeah. It's like that's another one of his great ones. And so, I think I've seen certain scenario. I've heard of certain scenarios now where there's been a blunder, like at the top, like, oh my gosh, this leader said this. And then like someone who's running internal comms or HR is like, you cannot say that anymore. You cannot do that anymore. Like we need to go work on this. So the person's, they might not have the awareness to see it, but somebody told them, which I think is still, I mean, that's almost as hard as they've come to you, they know they need to change. They didn't see it. They just didn't see it. Or the world has changed and they have not changed. What do you do in those scenarios? Because I still think like, hey, if you're not coachable, if there's not a willingness to grow, like, has that ever been dropped in your lap where someone's like, whether at Michigan State to the academy or come direct, where it's come through that sort of scenario, like there's a blemish, it's almost like crisis comms has started. Yeah. Have you?
Oh yeah, there's no question. I mean, that is in my private practice, that is probably 35 to 40% of my clients. The MSU CHRO Leadership Academy is more aimed at people who are in their first year in the C-suite in HR or on the cusp of it. And it's much more about guiding them through that first year really successfully, teaching them the things they don't need to know. It's less about their behavior. Whereas in my private practice, as you just described, I get a lot more of that. And I tell, I usually am hired by the company. And I'll tell them when they describe scenarios like that, particularly with older men, that the likelihood of success here is somewhere south of 50%. Because at that point in your life, your behavior is pretty ossified. What I typically do as part of that is I interview the people around them, including some of their nemesis, and I then reflect to them the direct feedback that people aren't willing to give them face to face. And bluntly, I usually try and engineer what I call, forgive the language, an oh shit moment, where they're looking in the mirror on a Sunday morning and thinking and sweating a little bit and thinking, you know what, my life goals are in jeopardy. And they need to go through that in most cases to then convince themselves that they want to do something about it.
Let's say for a second, and I would say this is probably not your core, but you've seen this. And let's make the assumption that someone listening right now is like, great, I actually report directly to that human being. Like
we all have,
right? We've all been there, right? And it's like, I'm frustrated. I spend a lot of time talking about this person at my dinner table. That's the last thing I should be doing or want to be doing. And it's just a suck on the energy, right? Like, but this is our reality, right? We are in our job and we're trying to somewhere between, it starts as navigate. Sometimes it's communicate, which is hard to do. And then it kind of moves into matador, right? It's like not a great place to be. So let's say I report to one of these leaders. What's your advice for somebody like that person on how to best sort of get the leader to be aware? Is there like a certain combination of words you've used in the past or we should use that can at least start the conversation?
Yeah. So of course, talking about this in general, I want to caution all of your audience that each situation, each relationship is unique. And so process some of the things that I'll suggest here and think about them in the context of that relationship. And what I mean by that is, there are some people who are objectionable in their behavior, who are so pathological in their behavior that they would be completely resistant to any feedback whatsoever, and they would seek to destroy the individual. They're relatively rare, especially these days, but they do exist. So what I'm talking about next is not them, right? That type of person you should go talk to other people about and make sure that they're aware of their behavior and get help. For the vast majority of people, they get to the position in life where they have these behaviors that have become just the fabric of who they are. And they don't lack self-awareness in all cases, but they do lack the awareness of how they are coming across to others. And so whether it's in my coaching practice or it was in my corporate life or in my own personal life, the place I've come to with them is I never react in the moment, because it's never going to be as calm and measured and be received as you would like it to be. But when I encounter those behaviors that I find objectionable, I write them down in the margin. I get 3 or 4 examples. I schedule a lunch. I sit down, we have lunch, and then I say, Ryan, man, I've really enjoyed the time today. I love being on your team. I love working with you. I just got to tell you, there's this one thing that is rubbing me the wrong way. And I feel like I owe it to you as my leader to let you know that, because it is harming my effectiveness. And more importantly, I value you as a person. And I think others notice this about you. And I just want to share some examples and tell you how I feel. And you take them through that, and it's sincere and it's heartfelt and it's framed within the context of I want to give you all I've got, and you're kind of in my way. But it's also done face to face, one-to-one, non-threatening, non-emotional. Does it always work? No. Does it, though? Ray Dalio, who was one of my many bosses at Bridgewater, wrote in his book on principles, one of his principles is pain plus reflection equals progress. And I think there's gold in that formula. So what you're bringing there is the pain, but you're doing it in a way that's not threatening. And you're giving that leader the opportunity to do the reflection that hopefully equals progress in your relationship.
I love that formula.
Yeah.
Just a winner, right? And and progress isn't a linear thing. So
Never.
Interesting how, how do you start a conversation like that? Right? Put yourself in and I like your comment also about, do everything in your power to at least take the emotional charge out of it. It's like, it's not a thing that happens in the moment. Take some notes, try to be observational about it. Super, super solid. As you were sharing, I couldn't help but think about something I'd love to run off you. And, I'll probably write about this, and, I got my little weekly dose of courage. But so you're going to be the first that I'm sharing this with. And where this is coming from, just so you know this, because I feel like we're kind of pivoting a little bit, is, you look at the choices you've made in your career, and it's been a pretty wild boomerang ride. Like, you started in Colorado at 2, you left, you went on this wild journey. Sure, there was pain, reflection, and progress, right? And now here you are in this, like, not a bad spot to be, right? In the mountains where you get to choose. You're designing a life for yourself. You're in the organizational design space, right? And so you're kind of living proof of what you practice, right? And you're skiing every other day. So I think a lot of us, we have this waiting for Godot existential destination, right? And we're on the journey, but the destination's like, am I ever gonna get there? Am I ever gonna, right? So I have these, like, I've been playing around with these 2 different sort of personal mantras. One I've had forever, and I think it's more of the destination mantra. And I'm coming to, it's like, it's my reflection. I'm coming so I've got this destination mantra, but what I think I was missing, and maybe it's because it's January, which also helps, right? So
Yeah.
new year, new me.
Reflection.
Yep. And so I have this journey mantra too now. And it's like, wow, I actually have 2 and they both work. And I've always heard, like, I think Iger talked about one hand in today and one hand in tomorrow, right? If you got 2 hands in today, you're missing the future, yada, yada, yada. So my destination mantra has always been patiently relentless. Like, I know I will get where I want to go. In some ways it take the emotion out of it, right? It's like, I'd love to do it. I want to make sure there's a sense of urgency, but not at the sake where it's an emotional charge and I'm bulldozing anyone, including myself, by the way. It's like, I'm patiently relentless. I will get there. Like, that means I got to have clarity of where I'm going. And I found in the here and now, on the journey side, that I still need tension. Like I still need there are moments where even I still need to tell myself, let's go. And so I've landed on maniacal devotion. And so I have these two. I'm just, again, I'm sharing and looking for like visceral real time. Like there are times where I'm like, I need maniacal devotion to get just through this step. Yeah, patiently relentless, I will get there, but I need this now. And it's helping me not procrastinate. It's helping me not just like, I'll put it off for another day. It's actually like almost this short circuit focus that I need. So one, I'm curious, what's your thoughts on like, who has two mantras? And two, does it fit together? Like, do you feel them as something that could play together?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel them. As you know, at about 5 years ago in my life, I was 55. I could have kept going in the corporate world, and I chose not to, in part because I could afford to, but in part because I wanted to change how I spent my time. And so that first mantra sort of fits with that. I will tell you, it took most of my life to have the vision for what I wanted. And it's very unconventional. I spend a third of my time messing around in the mountains and playing. I spend a third of my time in my own art and in my community, and a third of the time, leveraging my professional background. But the second one, if my wife were here, she would be laughing because she would say, if there's anybody who can be maniacally devoted, it's me. And whatever thing I am on, I'm a dog on the bone. And, I was asked a few years ago to start a not-for-profit up here to build an arts center. And we've gone from 0 assets to almost $4 million in a few years. And I had no clue what to do there, but I got interested. I'm lucky. My sister is the CEO of Ronald McDonald Charities. She gave me a ton of good advice, and we've been going after it hard. But it takes that. At least it does for me. I'm not smart enough to just dip my toe in and be really good at something. I have to really devote myself to it.
Oh, says the three major. I mean, if I'm only on one major, how smart am I? If you're in three majors and I'm on one.
Yeah. But I mean, you still had to do the work, right?
I also find it like there are certain things in my life that I know I need to, this is my new favorite word, maybe everybody in corporate. I know I need to sunset, right? That I'm not maniacally devoted. Like I don't feel maniacal about certain things like I used to. And so the things I do feel passionate about at that level that need my focus and attention, and I'm not afraid to put in the work, and I'm not afraid to do the late nights. And I still need to say it sometimes. And by the way, this is also like this morning when it's I'm air quoting because I live in San Diego, somewhat cold, right? I'm like maniacally devotion. Like I got to get up and get out and get running and just not overthink it to death. So yeah, it's cool. It's cool to hear. And then, so you said your world right now is like a third, right? Very process focused for being somebody that's in sort of human centered work. How did you come about with your own, was it just sort of stepping back and realizing that you were like, oh, that's interesting. I'm a third, or did you fully design this?
Eventually I designed it, but it really emerged out of my own self-reflection. I've been fortunate in my career in that I achieved some pretty substantive positions early. And so by my early 50s, I was, on my third chief HR officer, chief talent officer role. I had been doing that for a good chunk of my adult life. I'd experienced the heyday of the internet era and stuff like that. And I realized that the problems that were coming across my desk, they were the same problems all the time. They just had different names. And I also realized in my own reflection that I had gotten bored. And when I'm bored, it's not a good thing. People aren't getting my very best out of me. And as I'm fond of saying in a lot of the leadership development work I do, to whom much is given, much is expected. At the way that corporations pay C-suite executives, they should demand nothing but your absolute utmost. And I felt like I wasn't giving that anymore. So I had that catalyst for my own thinking about what I wanted in life and what was going to interest me. And I want to stress here, it's not like, I fell across $100 billion, and could just, we're well off, but we're not rich. I decided that I would rather be an entrepreneur because the more of that sort of thing I had tasted through my professional life, the more I liked it. And that I was really, one of the things I was chafing at is that things that I had come to value as an adult that I never would have guessed at when I was in college, my own art and things related to that, my love for the outdoors and all things that put me in there. It was 28 below, by the way, here yesterday morning, and I went skiing that afternoon. Those things had become really important to me. And I, being an HR guy, I can't tell you how many people I saw who worked until they were 68, retired because they physically had to, and then didn't live very long. And I did not want to be one of them. I wanted to be able to do these things when I was young enough to do them. So as I thought about that over the course of 3 or 4 years, the third thing kind of crystallized for me.
I mean, you kind of like took my next question, but I'm curious if this sparks anything else, which is, we talk a lot about the relationship between fear and courage. And one of my favorite Pull the Ryan Berman string lines is like, we're fear fighters, right? Like, we're corporate fear fighters. That's what we do. Like, let's go hunt down the largest fear inside a business and then go to work on it, right? And most people want to suppress that fear, right? Versus address the fear. But on a personal level too, like, there's big time personal fears. Like you said, like, that people might be like, yeah, I'd love to move to the mountains and figure out how to get out of this rat race cycle. I just don't, I'm terrified to even think about it. Well, I'd be okay. I've only known this job. I've only known this vertical, so I'm curious, one, and you can kind of take this in two ways because you kind of already answered it for yourself, but if there's more, like, was there a personal fear or a moment in time that you remember that you had to absolutely confront in order for you to achieve this current level of success? And like, what steps did you take to address them?
So a little bit of background that is context for the answer to your question. We talked a little bit about my parents and my childhood. One of the things that my parents chose when I was 10 years old is my dad was a Fulbright scholar and took a sabbatical, his first one at Michigan State. And we lived in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, where he worked. Who didn't? Right, everybody did. And this is 1974. So we're on the Iron Curtain. And where on a Friday, I left mid-Michigan, where the pictures in front of the classroom were George Washington and Richard Nixon. And a few days later, my mom dropped me off at the elementary school in Belgrade, where the pictures in the front of the room were Lenin and Tito. And I had a little red star on my blue jacket. And I was the only kid in the room who couldn't speak Serbo-Croatian. That cured me for the rest of my life of fear of looking different, awkward, being clueless of the social structure, all of those things. It was the greatest gift my parents could have given me. I would have killed, for the first week, I was going to try, I was ready to kill them. Within a month, I was fine. So fast forward decades, and I'm at Ford Motor Company. I had my master. I was absolutely on the traditional path. I got my master's degree from one of the best HRLR programs in the country. I go to Ford. I'm there for 14 years. And Ford moves you a lot. It's like the military. And we ended up in Colorado Springs, where I was doing a startup for Ford Credit. And pretty soon into that experience, my wife and I realized that we didn't want to go back to the Midwest. The grass is sometimes greener, and it was for us. And so the answer to your question is the first really major courageous thing I had to do was choose to leave Ford, which, you get a job at Ford Motor Company, you're pretty much guaranteed at the, kind of in the professional ranks of having a long, successful career and retiring with a nice, healthy pension, barring bankruptcy, which Ford managed to escape. And I chose to leave that. And I chose to leave that so that we could A, live in a place, B, I didn't have to wait the extra decade to get real responsibility. I could go do that immediately, which I had experienced in that startup. And C, give our children a platform for a life that I think was going to be richer and more compatible with their interests based on where we live. I now have one who lives in Jackson Hole, one who lives in Boulder. They love living in this region, and all those things worked out. But it was scary because I left Ford without a job.
When you made the move after 14 years, how old were the kids?
They the youngest was about 9 or 10, and the eldest was about 13, 14.
Yeah, I find that in my reflection, almost everything always comes back to like even this podcast, right? Like this could be a treasure map moment, right? Where, God forbid, let's say let's dream big. All right, I die at 101. Okay, hey, right, guy can dream, right? I die at 101. They're looking through all my stuff. They stumble across this, one of them, and they listen to this episode. Like part of my, I guess, intentionality is to leave the Reese's Pieces and ET, right? Like, what is the path that they might take? And I'm not here to tell them how to live their lives, just like my father gratefully was like, it's your life. You can make the choices that you want. But it is that it always comes back to a little bit of this always comes back to, I'm trying to mirror, if they so choose to live an adventure, go do it. And that's what I'm hearing from you. By the way, how long was when you got your master's? That's probably 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah, a couple of years.
Right.
Yep.
So you're basically talking, I know Ford bounced you around a bunch, right? But like, that's basically 16, 17 years. That's not a small period of time, right? Right. Of being on the path. And then it sounds like when you came out west or more west, it was still sort of like Ford-esque at first. Is that what it was?
The Ford moved us out here to do a startup in Colorado Springs for Ford Credit. Yeah.
Wow. And then you're like, wait a minute, choices. Yep. Here we go.
Yeah. And part of it was also, I had been, not to go down a tangent, but I had been in a strategy capacity at Ford prior to that, which is how I found out about this startup. And one of the things that became crystal clear to me in that work was that the domestic U.S. auto industry was going to go through very rough times sometime in my career. I wasn't prescient enough to know that, the Great Recession was going to happen 7 or 8 years later and Chrysler and GM would go bankrupt. But it was pretty clear that there would be bumpy times. And so part of my calculus, and I actually thought about it, my kids were 11 and 7, did I want to bet my future on a company was in an industry where there was inevitably going to be difficult times? And I looked around, saw all these high-tech companies, and I thought, that seems like a better model.
Well, in some ways, this is a pretty darn good place to sort of wrap up. Like when I hear that, you kind of lived pain plus reflection equals progress, right? Like you get out here and you're like, wait a minute, right? Like for the first time you look back at it and go, maybe this isn't the right place anymore. And it sounds like what an awesome rocket of a ride for the first 14. I want to just thank you because I think a lot of times people, they talk about balance as an idea of life. And when I hear that word, and again, you may have a completely different take on this, but I'm like, balance almost feels like a cop-out that you get to do the stuff you like for a while, then you can go do the other stuff you have to do, and then you get to go back, and it's like plus and minus charges going back and forth versus like, just integration, like designing a life that you get to do it all. And so I want to hear is that how you see it, or do you have a different take on balance? And then, kind of take us home here. As you think about, let's say we've got a 30-year-old, 35-year-old who's, they now know what business looks like, and they've probably been on a path too. Maybe they're not making as much money as they want, or maybe they're finally in a role of leadership and it's a new space for them. What's the best way? What's like the top 2 or 3 lessons they can take from your story? So first, I'd love to hear about your take on balance, and then let's kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think balance is a uniquely personal thing. In my coaching practice, we spend a decent amount of time talking about it, and each person's definition is different. So I think the first thing, you've got to know what it is you actually want. And, typically it's by looking at where you feel deficits in your life. And then having, again, the self-confidence and the agency to change your behavior. I mean, I was getting fat when I was early in my career because my butt was sitting behind a desk all the time. And so I confronted myself, and then I just started putting an hour, 3 days a week on my schedule, and I would religiously go to the corporate gym. And it's not my favorite thing to do, but you know what? I would get the exercise, and it made me better. It made me more clear and so forth. So I think balance is a uniquely personal thing. I think what gets in most people's way is they have this misperception. This will take me to my last point. They have this misperception that there's some eye in the sky who's watching over them, who is going to judge them for not spending time at work. And most people that I know, and I've been doing this stuff at a high level for decades, will tell you that they could care less if you go to your kid's soccer game at 2:00 on a Tuesday, as long as you get your job done. And the person who is stopping you from doing that is generally you. So there's that, which brings me to sort of the last point. You were asking me earlier about leadership values and that sort of thing. The thing that I would really like to tie into that and lead people with, there's a gal named Carol Dweck who's written extensively about her research into the growth mindset. And I think it's enormously valuable. There is no failure for 90% of us. If your audience is, watching this podcast, they're not struggling to find their next meal. They're not worried about home insecurity. They're not dealing with the things that a huge portion of our planet does deal with and that most of humanity has always dealt with. They've transcended that. And their fear of failure is way exaggerated versus the real threat. You get fired from a job, trust me, there's always another job. You fail in a performance review period, you can always fix that or go find another company. You do an investment and it fails, you can always make more money. People fall prey to their fears, and those fears are greatly exaggerated for the vast majority of professional people. And if you can put that aside and go after your passions and do the things that excite you, it's amazing how well things can work out.
Amen, man. And on that note, you got to get back to skiing, or you got to get some rest because it's got I think if this was the off day, you're back on skis
this is
tomorrow,
the off day
right?
from skiing because I had 5 meetings today, so I feel like I actually put in a work day.
Busy. Steve, thank you so much for joining. It sounds like maybe this is the most courageous thing I'll say today, but it also sounds like your sister should come on the show, right? Like we got to figure out a way to get her on the show because she's seen some things at Ronald McDonald House, right? And would love to welcome her on. And also, if you do find yourself out west, come hang out with me. It's more of the surfing than the skiing, and I'll be honest, I'm more a land shark anyway. But I'm a surf and turf surf guy.
Yeah.
But let's stay in touch, man, and keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for sharing.
You bet. My pleasure. And my wife will take you up on that, particularly about late March when we're tired of winter.
You're like, yes, we'll be what? There's a knock on our door? Well, who is it? Thanks, Steve.
And I will introduce you. It's Katie Fitzgerald. She was also the president of Feeding America during the pandemic.
I would love that. Thanks, man.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.